Recording. Hello, everybody there today? I hope everybody's doing well. This is going to be our second class. So again, if you don't know where you're at School of the East. Okay? And this is our second week in the spring quarter of 2020. Class is U.S. History through 1876. And this is our 8 a.m. class, okay, which would normally be held on Monday, the 20th of April. Okay. So, excuse me. This week's lecture will be about the Roanoke and Jamestown colonies, which you will learn are the two, or were the first two colonies in what became called the New World. So I'm going to proceed to the lecture, and we'll take a little time reading that, okay? And then hopefully if I don't get too far ahead, I'll know where to stop and give you the correct questions for each page. We will do questions for each page, okay? You're gonna have to maximize that. Okay. All right, so again, I hope everybody's doing well. Looks like it's gonna be a little warmer this week. The last week was kind of rainy. So anyway. All right. So English, French, and Dutch influences. After Christopher Columbus, which we read about last week, other explorers and expeditions established further colonies in the New World. French explorers led some of these expeditions, and the English some others. In fact, some of the explorations occurred almost concurrently, which means at the same time. This chapter will discuss those early explorers and settlers. So you need to know the difference. An explorer maybe comes through and then maybe leaves. A settler comes in and stays and lives there permanently, right? So early explorers and settlers and their permanent and not so permanent settlements. Settlements are where the people settle, where the homes that they make. You'll also get a glimpse is a small view, into how life in the New World survived in its first fledgling years. Fledgling means the very first years, the very first baby steps, right? Usually connected with some kind of struggle, right? Okay. All right. So we're going to get into the first colony. Okay, we're going to get into the first colony here. And it's the Roanoke, not the Roanoke, but the Roanoke colony. Sir Walter Raleigh, an English adventurer, writer, and explorer, was a prominent member of English society, and for a while, the favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. Prominent means very well known, usually very high level. in 1584, Raleigh obtained approval to colonize America. He wasted no time sending out a reconnaissance voyage led by Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlow, who returned. Oh, I lost my spot. What's going on here? Returned full of enthusiasm, citing abundant resources and friendly natives. Okay, so again, the vocabulary there. Reconnaissance is kind of like what we call a search party. So, for example, if you have like an army unit that's out helped by the Navy, they don't send the whole forces in. They send a small force first to see if it's safe, if it's dangerous, what's going on the land. So that's what a reconnaissance voyage. Enthusiasm, they returned full of enthusiasm, which is to be very excited. Citing, which means noting abundant resources. So abundant means a lot in resources. So it looks like there's plenty of trees, maybe fruits, different things like that. And of course, the most important, friendly natives, not people who want to attack you for being a stranger. Okay, continuing. Boasted with confidence, Raleigh then financed another sailing where he sent out 100 colonists in 7 ships to establish a colony on Roanoke Island, off of what is known today as North Carolina. Sir Richard Grenville and Sir Ralph Lane led this expedition. So again, they sent colonists, not like astronauts who went to the moon, took some rock samples, put up a flag and left, but people who are actually going to live there. Continuing, they built a fort, constructed houses, planted crops, and searched for gold. But within a year, nature and the natives forced them back to England. The English settlers weren't used to hurricanes, and the Native Americans proved to be hostile neighbors. Even though they abandoned the area, this was the first Roanoke settlement and the first ever English colony in America. Okay, I've had questions before in the past, like what is a fort? That's a big protective building, usually built by Army soldiers. So the fort is to surround the homes as a form of safety. Planted crops, we will learn about crops later. Search for gold, I guess, they thought gold was to be everywhere, but that's not the case. So, and then within a year, nature and the natives forced them back. So nature in the form of hurricanes and strong weather that they were not used to. And then the Indians proved to be a little hostile, as they say later, which means, maybe a little violent, prone to attacking. So they abandoned the area, which means they left it. Okay. Put the pager here. Okay. We get into our fun facts here. There are Native Americans now living in North Carolina who call themselves Croatan. And they often have English names. Some believe this is proof that the lost colonists were their ancestors. But English ancestry cannot be substantiated. The Fort Raleigh National Historic Site was established in Roanoke Island in 1941. So you'll learn about Croatan next. And they're just trying to put these two diverse or different pieces of information and say, maybe they are the ancestors of the colonists that disappeared. And we shall learn about that right now. Okay. Undaunted. A British man named John White arrived in Roanoke in 1587 with more colonists, including his daughter, Eleanor Dare, who was about to give birth. When she delivered a baby girl, she named the child, quite appropriately, Virginia Dare, the first English baby born in the New World. After a few weeks, White sailed back to England to gather more provisions. Fighting between England and Spain delayed his return. And here's the connection you'll see from the fun fact. But when he did sail back in 1591, he found a deserted colony with the word Croatan carved on a tree post. There was no visible sign that a struggle had taken place. The settlers had simply disappeared. The fate of the colony, which became known as the Lost Colony of Roanoke, is still a mystery, with some suggesting that the settlers were attacked and killed by the natives or by even the Spanish troops that were in the area. Others believe that the colonists went to live with the natives, so they didn't need to stay in the settlement, instead lived with the Indians, or perhaps on nearby Croatan Island. So before I give you the questions, let me make sure I can try to find some words, some vocabulary that might be difficult for you. Again, if you go back to the fun fact, it says ancestors, so sometimes people get confused. Those are the people that came before you. So if you're Korean, you might say, oh, my ancestor was King Sejong, right? If you're an American, you might say your ancestor was Abraham Lincoln. Okay. So we start, it says undaunted, a British man. Undaunted means a person that does not give up, or a person that is not afraid of the struggle ahead. They will proceed even though many people will say, you know, you shouldn't do that. You could be an undaunted business person. You might say, this area is not a good place to open a coffee shop, but you're undaunted and you're going to do it anyway. Okay. Later, when it says about Virginia, you'll find out why that's appropriate. Kind of a coincidence. Okay, it says White sailed back to England and gathered more provisions. Provisions is another word for supplies. Could be food, clothing, even alcohol. You're not sure. It's not clearly stated. So again, fighting between England and Spain delayed his return. But when he sailed back in 1591, he found a deserted colony, which means no people were living there. Their buildings were there, maybe possessions were there, but they themselves were gone. Okay. And then there were no visible signs that a struggle had taken place. Struggle is a fight of some kind, but I guess they didn't find bullet holes in trees or weapons scattered about or dead bodies, you know, skeletons. So it looked peaceful. The settlers had simply disappeared. Okay. The other parts, colonists, again, the settlers, pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to get into the questions for this page, page 18. So I'm going to move over to the whiteboard and write these questions up there. So please follow me. So I'm going to be writing question 1. Sure my spelling's correct here. Okay, so question 1. Who led the European expedition to the New World? Again, that's what they called it. Was not America at that time. So who led the expedition? So we're looking for a name of a person. Okay. Make sure these questions match up. Okay. All right, 2. Question 2 is, where did he land? Okay, so we're looking for a physical location, right? So you need to tell me the name of the area where this person landed, okay? So for that page, which would be page 18, I only have 2 questions, okay? Next page, I'll have more. But for that page, we only have 2. Okay, so I'm going to have to go back to the lecture and get out of the whiteboard. Okay. Okay. So now we're moving on here. Jamestown settlement. In 1605, 2 groups of London merchants who had combined the investments of many smaller investors petitioned King James I, or King James I, for a charter to establish another colony in Virginia. These 2 groups were the prototypes of modern day corporations and became the Virginia Company of London and Plymouth Company. Okay, merchants, London merchants. Merchants are businessmen, people who own businesses. And they combined or put together their investments with many other smaller investors, petitioned. I think we had this last week when we talked about Columbus. Petition, here they're petitioning King James I, which means they're asking for permission, asking for probably assistance for a charter to establish another colony. in Virginia, so they had to ask permission. So you see here, they're giving it away. Jamestown is in Virginia, and that's why they made the comment earlier about the first baby girl delivered in the New World. They named her Virginia, so you can see where they got it. These two groups, prototypes, right? Okay, prototypes are the initial first examples of something. So these are the first examples of modern day corporations like Samsung or Xerox or Apple, you name it. Okay. So to continue reading, after receiving its charter, so they were accepted, the Virginia Company organized its expedition, providing free passage to America in exchange for a contract under which the settlers agreed to 7 years of indentured servitude. That's a big one. I'll have to explain that. This became a popular arrangement. In December 1606, those who signed on, a total of 120, boarded 3 vessels, and then they'll say the name. So before I have to turn the page, I have to go over some things here. Okay, so the people who left, they were not charged. So imagine you get a free cruise ship ride, right? Even though it's not a cruise ship, or a plane ride. But what you did have to pay, since they're taking you to a brand new world, you had to give 7 years of indentured servitude. Now, I know some students, what does that mean, right? That's another word for, or 2 words for being a slave. So you don't get freedom until after 7 years. And whoever your boss is going to tell you what kind of work you're going to do and how long you're going to work and where you're going to sleep and what you're going to do. So you have no freedom for 7 years for this free ride to the new world. But obviously, so you might ask, why would people do that? Obviously, you're going to leave your situation where you're living in England, and you must be so poor or no prospects of ever owning any type of home or property that this is an opportunity for you, even though you're going to have to give up 7 years of your life and work like a slave. So that's the payment, not the passage. And these 120 people that went gladly did this. As it says, this became a popular arrangement. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next page. Okay, so these are the names of the 3 ships. The Susan Constant, the Discovery, and Godspeed. So we're Western people, a lot of times women are lucky. So that's why they named the one ship the Susan. If anybody, and I assume a lot of you have, if you've gone to Vegas, you see some American men gambling, a lot of times they will ask a pretty woman to blow on their dice or let the man touch them because they feel that women have luck that men do not have. And the second ship is the Discovery. They were hoping to discover a happy new world, an abundant new world. So they named that ship appropriately. And then the Godspeed, they were Christians and they wanted protection from God. So they wanted everything to be done under God's time. So that's why the third ship was named the Godspeed. As I continue, underway, which underway means it's going now. Let's keep it going. By May 1607, The 104 remaining settlers, commanded by Captain Christopher Newport, sailed their 3 rather frail vessels through the Chesapeake Bay and 30 miles up the James River to reach a parcel of densely wooded, swampy land. There, the settlers built Jamestown, England's first permanent colony. And like many other explorers before, they set out to find treasure. Again, like I said, they were looking for gold too. So here you have some interesting words that I'm going to try my best to explain. I have had to do a couple of these words before. And since these areas don't exist in Korea and Japan, my students have not been able to give me a Korean or Japanese word equivalent, but I will try to paint a picture for you in English. Okay, first we start with the word 3 rather frail vessels. Okay, frail is weak, weakly built or weakly structured. A very small, tiny woman, they say, she looks frail, right? So these ships were not the strongest of ships, at least strongly built. And vessels are another name for ships. And it says they went up the James River to reach a parcel. A parcel means an area, right? Again, this person's writing a book, so if they want to use high-level words, they can. Of densely wooded, anything densely, so wooded means there was a lot of trees. Swampy land. Okay, here's a word. Japan does not have a swamp, and to my knowledge, Korea does not have a swamp. You might have seen things here, or maybe you've gone to areas like Florida or Georgia, but the swampy area is like there's a lot of trees in the river. It's like a dirty river area. And here in our swamp areas, like Florida and Georgia, they are full of alligators. Okay. The Philippines, my Filipino students, you do have swamps and you do have crocodiles, which Southeast Asia has crocodiles. North America, we have alligators. So if you've seen things with, water snakes and alligators, here, that's a swampy area. There, the settlers built Jamestown, England's first permanent colony, and like many other explorers before, they set out to find treasure. Okay, so that's the self-explanatory. Now we'll go on to the crops. They arrived too late in the season to plant crops. Remember, crops are seasonal. We even had this issue to the day. It might be November, December, and I want cherries, and this is the year 2020, but that crop of cherries, they don't grow in the winter, so I have to wait until maybe spring to get my cherries. So this is why they arrived too late in the season to plant crops. And the swamps didn't help their chances of survival. Why a person picked a swamp, I don't know. I'm not saying that these areas are impossible to live in, because if you've heard of Cajun people from Louisiana, they were so poor. They originally came down from Canada, and they were so poor and could not speak English fluently. The first ones arrived and spoke French. They lived in the swamp, so they survived and ate alligators and raccoons and snakes. But for most people, this is not the best area to try to survive. And as you see, many of these genteel souls, which means very kind of soft or gentle, were not accustomed to manual labor. And neither were the valets who sailed with them. Everyone had to carve out homes in the wilderness, which is not an easy thing to do. There was no choice but to adapt. And many did not, okay, which means that they passed away, they died. Very sad. Within a few months, some settlers died of famine and disease, while others went to live with Native American tribes. Uh, Only 38 made it through their first year in the New World. So 120 went, 38 survived only. You can do the math there. So the vocab there is everyone had to carve out home, which literally means carve out, cut down the trees and try to make a house from the trees. If you're not used to working like that, I don't know how you're going to do it. Adapt is a big word, okay? And adapt means you become accustomed to and do it, or you do not, you cannot, and you have to move on. I can tell you a funny story. Obviously here, not having a background in carpentry or hard work, being a gentle person, and then having to survive in a swamp area, that's why so many died. They could not adapt. But again, in a funny area, I used to work with a gentleman that dated a beautiful Korean lady. And when I knew him, it was many years later, so obviously he didn't marry the Korean lady. And he did say she was beautiful and very kind, and she was fantastic. So I said, "You did not marry her. What happened?" He told me there was one thing as an American man he could not adapt to. I had no idea what that was. And when I found out the answer, I was shocked. He could not adapt to kimchi. Okay, he couldn't stand the smell. He couldn't stand how it tasted. And of course, she was a nice Korean lady, so she ate a lot of kimchi. So he could not adapt. At least he survived. He didn't die. He did not wind up marrying the pretty Korean lady. So very sad. I could have done that. Everybody's different. Okay, then we continue here. Some settlers died of famine, which means it's another word for starvation, and disease, which again, there could be many kinds of diseases. And then others went to live with the Native American tribes. So if you don't know how to survive in some area and you can't make a home and you don't know what to do, there's a group of people around like the Native Americans who have been there for 1,000 years, who knows? And they're surviving, you go live with them if they accept you. Okay? Uh, so again, only 38 made it through the first year in the New World. Okay? So, as I end this page, that these settlers survive at all is due in large measure to Captain John Smith, a former crusader and pirate turned gentleman. Smith was chosen to lead the Jamestown colony in 1608, but became a bit of a dictator, ruling with harsh orders such as no work, no food. He turned the settlers into, as I continue, foragers and successful traders with the Native Americans, who taught the English how to plant and other crops. Okay, so let me go over this last part of vocab that you might not know before I get into the page 19 questions. So he became a bit of a dictator. So today, in the news, probably the most famous dictator that people consider a dictator is Kim Jong-un. Why is he a dictator? Because he completely controls his country. United States, we have checks and balances. So a lot of people might not like President Trump. And they say, oh, he's a dictator. But he's not. If he wanted to go to war today, even with North Korea, He cannot. The Senate has to give him the okay. So there's a check and balance there. But with Kim Jong-un, there's nobody that can tell him no, nobody that can stop him or make him wait. He will do whatever he wants and controls his people completely. So they're saying here that in this small Jamestown colony in 1608, that suddenly with this power, Captain John Smith became a bit, so that means a small, but who's to say, right? We didn't live there at the time. Maybe he was more than just a small dictator. Harsh orders mean strong orders, almost orders that are not acceptable. So no work, no food. So if people were lazy or people were tired, they didn't work one day, they didn't get food for that day. So for some people, that's a good way to inspire them to work. For other people, that doesn't work so well. And thus, he turned settlers into foragers, which meant if he was not going to give them food because they didn't do the amount of work that he demanded, they went looking into the forest for their own food, whether that be some types of berries or if they were actually going to kill small animals that they found, maybe even squirrels, and successful traders. So maybe they had something. Usually they had things, iron goods, pots and pans and spoons. The Native Americans did not have iron at that time. So they were very happy to see iron products like that. So you could go, maybe you had a coffee cup made of iron or a plate or a spoon and a fork. And then you found some Native Americans and said, can I trade this to you for some corn or some food? And then they would, and then you would survive. So, and again, I mentioned corn because you see here that the English were shown how to plant corn and other crops. Corn was from the North America and South America. It was later brought to Europe, but it was not native to Europe. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to the whiteboard and give you the questions for page, the next page. Oh, I forgot to erase these questions. So let me go to the eraser. Get rid of those. And remind myself something else here, because I want to be as fair as I can to everyone here. So let me go write the new questions, and we'll have one more on this page that we did on the last. Okay. Okay. So question 3. Where was the Jamestown settlement? Again, I'm asking for a physical location here. So give me the location. I mentioned the answer to that a couple of times, so that should not be too difficult. Okay. Now, actually, I jumped ahead here, but that's okay. I need you to tell me first, actually, but you can do it the second, doesn't matter. Where did he land? You're going to say, who is he, right? That refers to your first set of questions. The first page, you only had a couple of questions. So, oh, I'm sorry. Getting ahead of myself or backing up here. So actually, I've already given that one. That was the first one. So this one is, here we go. This has to do with the people. Okay. It's a bit longer of a question. Okay. So the people who went to Jamestown traded free passage, which means, again, a free ticket. For what? Remember, in this world, if you take economics, so it tells you there is no free lunch. Nothing is free. So they didn't have to pay the fare, but they did have to pay in another way for this free ship ride from Europe all the way to the New World and what later became known as America. And then the last question for this page. Okay, who was the leader of Jamestown? I talked about a few people lastly, so please don't put Kim Jong-un, okay? I did mention him, but he was not the leader of Jamestown, okay? So again, that should be pretty easy. Remember, he became some type of a dictator, right? I guess because there was only 2 questions in the first one, I forgot to mention, but here there's 3. Again, some students are a little slower than others, so I'm going to give you time here. Remember, the important thing is to, make sure you have the questions, or if you're going to write them down on a separate piece of paper. You can do your answers later. So I know I'll get students that they'll write the first question, they're trying to find the answer, and then I've given questions. I put 3, 4, and 5, and then I'm done, and then they're like, hey, I didn't get questions 4 and 5. So concentrate on the questions first. So I'm going to give you a little time to make sure if you're transcribing to a piece of paper, you have these. I don't want to erase them too quickly, and then the students complain that we're up there too short. So again, question 3, where was the Jamestown settlement? Again, I need a location. Don't say K-Town. Right? And remember, everything in the early parts of what later became America was always on the East Coast. Nothing came past Texas. And then for the people who went to Jamestown, traded free passage for what? Again, they got a free ticket and they landed there, but then they had to pay in another way. I'll just give you one little hint. 7 years. And I don't mean interest. 7 years of a payment. And then 5, who was the leader of Jamestown? So you just have to put the name of this person, okay? All right, so I think that's enough time on the questions, so let me erase these. Go to the eraser. And I'll start with 3. That's gone. And I'll go to 4. Bye-bye. And 5. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the exciting lecture. Yes, history is exciting. Okay, so we're now with John Smith and Pocahontas. Smith led expeditions to explore the regions surrounding Jamestown. And it was during one of these that the chief of the Powhatan Native American Indians captured Smith. According to an account Smith published in 1624, he was going to be put to death until the chief's daughter, Pocahontas, saved him. Pocahontas' real name was Matoaka. The native name Pocahontas means playful one. From this legend of Pocahontas sprang forth, becoming part of American folklore, children's books, and movies. But did it really happen? So they're going to explain maybe a side note here. Let me get into the vocabulary. So Powhatan is just the name of the tribe. For a country like, let's say, traditional Korea, Korean people always would say one blood. They only had one group of people. But if you're from China, you know you have the majority Han people, and I think it's either 52 or 56 what are called ethnic minorities. So people that are not directly Han Chinese, but they are Asian, but they are not Han Chinese. So we have going to be put to death, which means killed, right? Killed by the tribe itself. But she saved him. Okay. From this legend, so there's every country has its own legends, right? Sprang forth. You say, what does that mean? Well, that comes from the word and verb spring, like springs you have in your mattress. So they're saying it came from, it jumped from, right? This story about her. And it became part of American folklore. So American folklore, like if you've heard of Paul Bunyan and his blue ox, or his ox named Blue, but it was a blue color, supposedly. Usually folklore stories, since they happened so far long ago, they're very hard to prove for 100%. So some people believe in them. Some people say, well, I don't know about that. It's just folklore. I've been told Korean folklore that the first Korean people were actually bears. So I don't know if that's true or not. If I'm able to go to Korea and speak to a bear, I might ask one. But that's a Korean folklore. So this Pocahontas, we've had a movie by Disney. That's why it says children's books and movies. But did it really happen? So I'll proceed a little more into her story. Okay. And here we have another fun fact. In their very first years in Virginia, the British encouraged interracial marriage, oh my, with the Native Americans in order to promote better relations. In Virginia, money was offered to white Virginians who would marry Native Americans. Wow. Few took advantage of the offer, and later the English would forbid interracial marriage. So anything forbidden means it's against the law. So first they accepted it to promote better relations and even offered money. So I guess that would be like if I went to Korea and they offered me money to marry Kim Tae-hee, but I guess we can't do that. She's with a B, but that's what they were doing. Later, they forbid it, though. Pocahontas would be one of the last Native Americans to be accepted into British American society through marriage. I guess they weren't encouraging that later, right? And if you remember in the last week when I talked about Columbus, and he took a few Taino Indians that never returned. No government that he was related to, the Spanish government, paid for people to marry them. If they got married, and I found out a few did, it's because the ladies just found the men handsome. Okay. So that's our fun fact there. So let's continue. Some historians believe the event did not actually occur or happen because they say Smith did not mention this Native American woman or his release in any of the documents he wrote about the colony's first year. Now, if I may talk about that, maybe he didn't want to. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Maybe it would have been an embarrassment for his family if they found out that he was saved by a Native American woman, or even to other soldiers that would say, it would hurt his ego, in other words, that you were saved by a woman. Aren't you a strong soldier? So maybe it did happen. He just did not want to talk about it. Smith's account of the capture was published in 1624, long after the supposed event took place, which leads some historians to believe Smith was just trying to create a good story. So you see here, he finally wrote about it, which most people do when they get older and they feel they don't care or don't have as much ego as they do as a young person. But some historians think, oh, no, he was just trying to create a good story that sounded good. But again, we were not there in the 1620s, so we don't know for sure. Would have been great if they could have taught Pocahontas how to read and write, then maybe she would have written something. So we would have more insight into their relationship. But you will see what happens to Miss Pocahontas shortly. In 1614, John Smith returned to America and exploring and mapping the New England coast. He later sailed back to England with valuable furs and fish and became a prolific writer and supporter of American colonization. Oops. It's during this period that Smith penned the General History of Virginia. You see that IE, that's the Old English. New England and the Summer Isles, which means islands. And the two travels, adventures, and observations of Captain John Smith. John Smith died in 1631. As you can see here, due to rough lifestyles at the time, most people did not live a long life. So you can see it not too long from when he was there. He was captured, he met her, he came back, he wrote books, and then he passed away. Okay, so I'm done with this page, but I have some vocabulary to do before I go to the questions. So we all know exploring and mapping. Furs were very valuable at the time. And you had the seal fur that they used, and otter fur, fox fur. So they killed a lot of animals to make fur, use the oils. Okay. And it said he became a prolific writer. Anybody that does something prolifically, they do a lot. So he just, and as you see, they listed a list of books. He didn't write one or two or three. He wrote quite a lot. That's why it was prolific. And he was a supporter of American colonization. That means the British control everything. Americans don't like to hear that, but he was a Britisher, so I'm sure that's what he believed. Okay, and then it ends with he died in 1631. So this would be page 20, and let me write the questions. Go to the whiteboard. And write the next set of questions. Okay, question 6. Who was Pocahontas? So again, you'll have to say, who was this lady, right? So I get my funny students who don't pay attention, or they play Candy Crush or who knows what. And then the midterm comes and I put the question there. They'll say, oh, who's Pocahontas? She was in a Walt Disney cartoon movie. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's not the answer I'm looking for here. Okay. So just remember that. Okay, I'm on to question 7. Okay. Pocahontas would be one of the last natives to be accepted where? Okay, again, I'm not looking for you to say, oh, she was the last person to be accepted in the bowling league, right? That's not what I'm saying. Again, who are the people that arrived there first? Oh, okay. I was trying to fit something in here. I guess it doesn't want to. So, the people who arrived, they had a society. So think of it like that. So again, don't put the bowling league. Okay. Okay. Here's 8. Okay. So 8 is, what was the top crop? Oops, I think I jumped ahead there. Let me make sure, make doubly sure. I think I'm giving you a view of what yeah, okay. So let me, I'll erase that. I'm jumping ahead. Okay, so I guess you're lucky. I guess on this page you only have 2 questions. Okay, so again, let me give you time to answer those 2. Again, who was Pocahontas? Don't tell me she was a cartoon movie from Disney. Give me a little more substance or what she did for somebody, or whose daughter was she? And then the next one, again, we're talking about the new society that came in there connected to her. So Pocahontas would be one of the last natives to be accepted where? Okay. All right. So I think that's enough time on that. Let me go to the eraser. 6 is gone. 7 is gone. So go back to the reading here. Okay. So evidence is scarce that Pocahontas actually helped John Smith, risking her life to save him. An account that is probably more accurate states that Smith participated in an initiation ceremony, making him an honorary Powhatan tribesman. The Jamestown settlers did capture a young Pocahontas around 1612, returning her to their colony. In captivity, she caught the eye of John Rolfe, an Englishman who later married her with the blessing of her father. That would be the chief and the English governor. This established a peace with the Powhatans that lasted 8 years. Pocahontas converted to Christianity and took the name Rebecca, or the English name Rebecca. In 1615, she gave birth to her first child, Thomas. With his bride and new son, Rolfe returned to England. Soon, Pocahontas captured. Okay, so before I proceed, let me go on with some vocabulary here. Evidence is scarce. So scarce means it's very little of something, right? So evidence is scarce that Pocahontas actually helped John Smith, risking her life to save him. Again, I don't know what they're basing that on because they don't have enough evidence. Okay, I don't know what they need. An account is probably more accurate, which means more correct. States that Smith participated in an initiation ceremony. Initiation means an acceptance ceremony, making him an honorary because he was not Powhatan by blood, but they were going to make him one honorary Powhatan tribesman. It is noted, I guess, that the Jamestown settlers did capture a young Pocahontas around 1612, and they returned her to their colony. It says she caught the eye of John Rolfe, which means he saw her and was attracted to her. An Englishman who later married her with the blessing of her father. So her native father said okay, and an English governor, right? I'm not sure if this was after the time that they encouraged the marriage of the interracial marriages, but this was still done. And this established or made a peace with the Powhatans that lasted 8 years. So I guess that tells you after that there was fighting. Pocahontas converted to Christianity, so she left her native faith. A lot of native people are, and that's just the world over, are animists, and they worship nature, just like Shintos in Japan. And so she converted to Christianity and took the name Rebecca. In 1615, she gave son to her. Okay, so that's self-explanatory. Okay, so I'll have to proceed. There's no new vocabulary there. Okay, in the people's hearts. Just as she was preparing to return to Virginia in 1617, Pocahontas died of smallpox and was buried in the chapel of the parish church in Gravesend, England. Now we'll get into the top crop. So you already snuck that question in there for you. So you're ahead of the game. So the top crop. Although Pocahontas won the hearts of the English, tobacco also captured their attention. In 1612, colonists began growing tobacco, and it was a primary reason behind the Jamestown settlement's success. In fact, Jamestown became the capital of Virginia again. It later became a state named after the first baby born in a European baby born in the New World. So if anybody asks you, you know how Virginia got the name of Virginia, the state? You know why. Some American kids do not. Okay, so back to some vocabulary here before I go on to the fun fact. Smallpox is a disease, you know, smallpox, measles, mumps, chickenpox, so smallpox. And the reason why she died of it is because, again, if you remember when I talked about Columbus, these people were so pure and so clean, unlike the dirty sailors that spent months on the ship with rats traveling to the New World. They had no immunity to these diseases. So most of them quickly just died, right? So just like now, people get the coronavirus and survive, now they have an immunity. They can go be around coronavirus people and not worry. Uh, so again, she was buried in the parish church. Okay, that's self-explanatory. Uh, so the primary reason for the Jamestown success was tobacco. So most people think, oh, tobacco came from Europe, right? And the Dutch cigarettes and the cigars. And well, no, tobacco originally came from Native American people. Indian people had the first tobacco. So something for you to know. So now we go into the fun fact. The tobacco plant in the Americas can be traced back more than 8,000 years. Native Americans eventually started smoking and chewing the dried tobacco leaves. So they didn't even, there's no process about putting an outer layer. They just smoked the leaves. And by the time Europeans came to North America, tobacco was growing in abundance, or meaning a lot. It's everywhere. So again, that's your fun fact. Just like last week's lesson with learning that corn and pumpkins came from North America. In fact, nothing is more American. Well, we can't go right now, right? We're blocked to going to the movie theaters, but nothing is more American than getting popcorn at the movie theater. But popcorn was originally done by the Native Americans. They put corn under the ground and heated it, and the kernels popped. So that's something else that Native Americans do not give credit for. But they're the originators of popcorn. Okay. All right, so that's your fun fact. So let me finish the bottom of the page here, then I'll get into the questions. Moreover, the tobacco crop attracted more settlers to the colonies, where they planted it in every available inch of fertile soil. But once indentured servitude ended, settlers were hard-pressed to maintain their tobacco and other crops. So they began purchasing laborers from Dutch traders, and you will find out what kind of laborers they were, who kidnapped Black Americans in their homeland. So we're talking about slaves, African slaves, transported them against their will across the ocean, and sold them to plantation owners, the start of slavery in America. Okay, so again, I've gone over abundance. Fertile soil is good soil that's good for growing things. And here we go back to indentured servitude in the beginning of our chapter, which again is another word for you will give me my freedom after I have served a certain amount of time, 7 years, for you as in a slave-like manner. It says settlers are hard-pressed to maintain. So hard-pressed means it was difficult to maintain their tobacco and other crops. So they began purchasing or buying workers from Dutch traders who had Black slaves on their ships. Okay. So that's the end of that, page 21. So let me go to the questions for you there. So let me make sure I see this correctly. I think it's a pretty easy one. This is going to be What was the top crop of the New World? So we've talked about pumpkins. We've talked about corn. We've talked about popcorn. We didn't talk about kimchi, right? We didn't talk about miso. So, or chiles. So I think it's pretty easy. What was the top crop of the New World? You could be able to do that one. Okay. So let me go on to the next one. So we go back to we can't never ask enough questions about her. So what did Pocahontas die of? Did she die of a broken heart? Did she die of arthritis? What is it that she possibly died of? I mentioned what it was, and we've talked about certain diseases in the past. I want you to accurately let me know exactly what this poor lady succumbed to. Okay. So, next one. Okay. Jamestown became the capital of which state? Okay. Again, I've mentioned these names a number of times. So I'm giving you time to answer these. You don't say that I erased them too quickly and you weren't able to concentrate on them. So again, the strategy here is make sure you have the question. If you're going to transfer that to paper, write them down and you have the video at your leisure. And you can answer them at a later time. Okay? All right, so going back, 8, what was the top crop of the New World? Okay, it was not wheat. It was not barley. 9, what did Pocahontas die of? The hint I will give you that it was some kind of disease. No, she did not die in a car crash. There were no cars at that time. And 10, Jamestown became the capital of which state? You know, we're talking about later. So we're just trying to connect time frames there. Okay. All right. So I think I've given you enough time on those questions. I'll use the eraser. Go back to 8. Okay. Bye-bye. Go to 9. Adios. 10. Jamestown. Sayonara. Okay. Okay. So let me get out of the whiteboard. Okay. And I have a little more reading to do here, so I shall continue. Relations with the Native Americans began to sour, for the natives frequently attacked Jamestown. In 1622, 350 colonists were killed. By 1644, a total number of 500 had perished. In 1676, the colonists rebelled against the rule of Governor William Berkeley in what's known as Baker's Rebellion, or Bacon's Rebellion, you know, bacon and eggs. So a group of former indentured servants led by plantation owner Nathaniel Bacon didn't think Berkeley was protecting them from Native American raids. When Bacon and his men formed a small army to punish the Native Americans, Berkeley denounced them as rebels. Okay, when things begin to sour, it means they go bad. So the thing with this last part, and I wouldn't ask any question from here because I try to protect you. There's too many dates and numbers. You know, I could say in 622, how many colonists were killed? In 1644, a number of had perished. I'm not going to confuse you with that. You need to remember the major points and the major players. So this number of this and that is not important. So let me proceed to the last reading. So you will not get a question for that. And okay. In Jamestown in 1676, Bacon captured the town and burned it. Okay, again, this is more in-depth information that you don't need to really concern yourself about. Middle Plantation is what is now Williamsburg, became the seat of colonial government in 1699, and Jamestown was left deserted. Okay. The Dutch arrived. Remember, they had some Dutch traders that brought the first slavery contacts, hired by the Dutch to find the Northwest Passage to Asia. English explorer Henry Hudson sailed into the wonderfully sheltered bay at Manhattan Island, one of the greatest natural harbors in the world, in 1609. Spurred or enthusiastically brought on by Hudson's tales of fur trading paradise, the Dutch West India Company colonized this new region in 1624, calling it New Netherlands. The following year, they established a Dutch trading post named New Amsterdam on Manhattan's southern tip. Soon, the Dutch began other settlements in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, building a fortification to protect the colony from potential English or Native American invasions. Okay. This wall encompassed the area we now know as Wall Street. Okay. And then you get into the fun fact here and the end of our reading for the day. The Dutch settled Manhattan in 1624 and inhabited Coney Island soon afterward. Since the Dutch word for rabbit was konijin, and the Barrier Beach Island had a large population of wild rabbits, this may have led to the name. In 1644, Peter Stuyvesant, then the governor, had to deal with a struggling colony where the lure of trading in spices or slavery was more lucrative, or possibility of making a lot of money, that's what lucrative is, for many Dutch. Then the British invaded. At first, Stuyvesant vowed to fight them, but when the leading merchants petitioned him to give up and not ruin their city, he relented or gave in. The new English governor offered free passage back to Holland for those who didn't wish to stay, but reportedly no one left. 2 days later, on August 29, 1664, New Amsterdam was renamed New York after the Duke of York, a birthday present from brother King Charles. So again, I'm feeling kind here. We're at the end of the lesson. As of today, I've already given you like 10 questions. So I'm not going to write questions here. A lot of this stuff is a mishmash here, and I don't want to get you confused. But pay attention to this section. I might write you or a question that's really, really simple. So you at least have to have like a wow, because that's why we have fun facts in this book, right? Facts that maybe even people, you might ask an American person, how did Coney Island, I'm from New York, I Coney Island all the time, I ride all the rides, I eat the hot dogs. How did it get its name? Huh? I have no idea. So be careful, you know. I might do it on the review or I might not ask it because sometimes I don't ask a question from the review, but I'll put it on the test because it's so obvious and so important and was mentioned in a fun fact. So I might ask something in the midterm, like how did Coney Island get its name? Or what is this thing about New Amsterdam and New York and why? So all these things are really cool information, right? The Dutch began settlements in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, right? I know some of you students have been in New York and have been to these places, right? So just read the fancy stuff here. Don't worry about 1644, Peter Stuyvesant, you know, the Dutch did this or that, they invaded. No, just remember the stuff that we can relate to today as far as how did New York get its name or Coney Island or who was in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and the Queens? That's the stuff you need to worry about, okay? All right, so that's it for today. We've done our reading. It was quite interesting. We've gone through all the questions. I've given you a heads up. So this will be the end of our second week. And I thank everybody for attending today. And good luck, and I will see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.